The void between star systems held secrets that most civilized species preferred to leave undisturbed. In the contested border region between the Azath system and human territory, the battleship Earthwarden cut through space with the deliberate precision of a predator on patrol. Captain Mara Thorne stood on the bridge, her weathered hands clasped behind her back, as she watched the star patterns shift across the main viewport. Humanity had earned a reputation among the galactic community that was both feared and misunderstood. They called humans Deathworlders, a species that had evolved on a planet so hostile that survival itself had forged them into something unprecedented. Earth, with its crushing gravity, violent weather, toxic atmosphere by galactic standards, and evolutionary pressure that favored aggression and adaptability, had produced beings that other species viewed with a mixture of awe and terror. The Earthwarden was a testament to that reputation. Measuring nearly 2 kilometers in length, its hull bore the scars of countless engagements, each mark a story of survival against impossible odds. The ship's crew of 800 represented the finest of human military engineering, genetically enhanced for zero-gravity combat, psychologically conditioned for extended space deployment, and technologically augmented with neural interfaces that allowed them to operate at speeds that would leave other species helpless. Captain Thorne herself embodied the Deathworlder stereotype. At 43, she had spent half her life in the black between stars, fighting pirates, exploring hostile systems, and establishing humanity's presence in a galaxy that wasn't entirely sure it wanted them there. Her dark skin bore the telltale patterns of radiation exposure that marked veteran spacers, and her cybernetic left eye could process tactical data at superhuman speeds. The bridge around her hummed with quiet efficiency. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss monitored communications from her station, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that tracked dozens of frequencies simultaneously. Chief Navigator Marcus Webb plotted their patrol route through the contested zone, his enhanced spatial cognition allowing him to calculate FTL jumps that would challenge most AI systems. Tactical Officer Elena Rodriguez kept watch over the ship's formidable weapons arrays, her neural link providing constant updates on threat assessments and targeting solutions. It was Rodriguez who first detected the anomaly. "Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the bridge's ambient noise, "I'm picking up a transmission on a restricted frequency. It's using old Galactic Council encryption protocols." Thorne turned toward the tactical station, her cybernetic eye automatically adjusting its focus to read the data streams flowing across Rodriguez's displays. "Restricted how?" "Frequency 847.2 terahertz. That's reserved for species under Galactic Council protection status." Rodriguez's expression grew troubled. "The signal's origin appears to be the Velis system, but according to our databases, no Council-protected species are supposed to be operating in that region." The Velis system was a watery world on the edge of Azath space, known primarily for its extensive ocean mining operations and the aquatic species that called it home. The Aquor, as they were known, were a peaceful race of amphibious beings whose technological development had focused on underwater construction and aquaculture rather than military advancement. They had been among the first species to petition the Galactic Council for protection status when aggressive neighbors began eyeing their resource-rich world. "Put it through," Thorne ordered, settling into her command chair. The neural interface built into the chair's headrest activated automatically, connecting her consciousness to the ship's communication systems. The transmission that filled the bridge was unlike anything they had encountered before. The voice that spoke was clearly alien. Multiple tonal harmonics that suggested vocal cords evolved for underwater communication. But the words it spoke in halting galactic standard sent a chill through the crew. "This is Elder Rylath of the Aquor Colony Worlds, broadcasting on emergency frequency to any vessels capable of response. Our people face extinction. The Bio-Leech Collective has begun systematic harvesting of our population. We have sent distress calls to all allied species. All have refused aid. The Galactic Council declares intervention too dangerous. We know your reputation, humans of Earth. You are called the most dangerous species in known space. Perhaps. Perhaps only the most dangerous can help us now. The transmission repeated twice more before cutting to static. In the silence that followed, Thorne could feel the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. The Bio-Leech Collective was a name that sent fear through even hardened military personnel. They were a species that had embraced cyborgification to such an extent that the line between biology and technology had been completely erased. They traveled in hive mind fleets, stripping resources and population from worlds they conquered, adding the biological components to their collective mass, while discarding what they deemed unnecessary. "Ma'am," Voss said quietly, "standing orders from Earth Command are explicit. We're not to engage in any military action that could be construed as aggression against Galactic Council policy. The non-interference doctrine specifically prohibits—" "I know what the orders say, Commander," Thorne interrupted. She stood and walked to the main viewport, staring out at the stars that held so many secrets and dangers. "Rodriguez's analysis of the signal. Is it genuine?" The tactical officer worked for several minutes her enhanced reflexes, allowing her to process data at speeds that would overwhelm an unaugmented human. Signal origin confirmed as Velis system. Encryption patterns match Aquar communication protocols. Stress analysis of the vocal patterns suggests extreme distress. "Captain, I believe this is real." The bridge fell silent again. Every officer present understood the implications. The Galactic Council had spent decades building a careful framework of laws and treaties designed to prevent the kind of interspecies warfare that had devastated the galaxy in earlier eras. The non-interference doctrine was a cornerstone of that framework, explicitly forbidding member species from intervening in conflicts involving protected worlds without Council authorization. But the Aquar were dying, and their protectors had abandoned them. Thorne made her decision with the kind of swift certainty that had kept her alive through 2 decades of deep space combat. "Voss, open a channel to Admiral Ruiz at Fleet Command. Priority 1 encryption." "Ma'am, if I may," Navigator Webb interjected, "the Velis system is 14 hours away at maximum FTL. If we're going to respond to this distress call, we need to move soon. Every minute we delay could mean more Aquar casualties." "I understand the tactical situation, Mr. Webb," Thorne replied. "But I'm not taking this ship into combat without authorization from someone with more stars on their uniform than I have." The connection to Earth Command took several minutes to establish, routed through a series of quantum entanglement relays that spanned the distance between their current position and Earth. When Admiral Imani Ruiz appeared on the main screen, her expression suggested she had already been briefed on the situation. Ruiz was a legend in her own right, one of the architects of humanity's expansion into the galactic community. At 67, she had commanded fleets during the Kepler Rebellion and negotiated the treaties that established human territory in the Outer Spiral. Her reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by her political acumen. "Captain Thorne," she said without preamble, "I assume you're calling about the Aquar transmission. The answer is no." "Ma'am, with respect, an entire species is facing extinction. The Bio-Leech Collective is exactly the kind of threat that the Galactic Council was designed to handle," Ruiz interrupted. "Mara, I understand your instincts here. Hell, I share them. But we've spent 30 years building our reputation as a species that can be trusted to follow galactic law. If we throw that away for one rescue mission, no matter how justified, we'll find ourselves isolated again." Thorne felt frustration building in her chest, a familiar sensation that reminded her why she had chosen a career on the frontier rather than in the political halls of Earth Command. "Admiral, the Council has already failed them. Their own protection protocols have been revealed as worthless. How does that serve galactic stability?" The connection flickered slightly as the quantum relay systems adjusted for stellar interference. When Ruiz's image stabilized, her expression had softened slightly. "Mara, you're one of the best combat commanders humanity has produced. Your tactical record speaks for itself. But this isn't just about tactics. If we intervene in Velis without Council authorization, we give every species in the galaxy an excuse to ignore the treaties when it suits them. The consequences could be catastrophic. And if we don't intervene, the Bio-Leech Collective gets a foothold in Azath space. How long before they start looking at human colonies? It was a fair point, and both women knew it. The Bio-Leech Collective operated on a principle of exponential expansion. Each world they consumed provided resources for attacking the next, creating a pattern of conquest that could snowball beyond any single species' ability to contain. Ruiz was quiet for a long moment, and Thorne could see the conflict playing out behind her superior's eyes. Finally, the Admiral spoke. "You have 48 hours to resolve this situation, Captain. Whatever you decide to do, make sure it doesn't officially involve Earth Command. If this goes badly, you'll be facing a court-martial. If it goes well..." She paused. "If it goes well, humanity might just earn a new kind of reputation in the galaxy." The transmission ended, leaving Thorne alone with her crew, and an impossible decision. Technically, Admiral Ruiz had given her no authorization to act. But the subtext had been clear enough. Earth Command would not officially sanction a rescue mission, but they would not actively prevent one either. "Mr. Webb," she said, turning back to her crew, "plot a course for the Velis system. Maximum FTL best possible time." "Course plotted, ma'am. 14 hours, 17 minutes at full burn." "Ms. Voss, send a message to the fleet. Emergency recall of all Earth vessels in this sector. We're going to need everything we can get." Over the next several hours, as the Earth Warden raced toward the Velis system, 9 additional human vessels answered the call. The heavy cruiser, Adamant, commanded by Captain Torres, had been conducting anti-piracy operations near the Kepler Nebula. The destroyers, Relentless and Victorious, broke off from a training exercise in the Centauri system. The assault carrier, Sovereign, diverted from a supply run to the outer colonies, bringing with it a full complement of marine strike teams. As the fleet assembled in the void between star systems, Thorne found herself in the unusual position of commanding what amounted to an unsanctioned military operation. The ships under her command represented nearly a third of humanity's total deep space combat capability, and she was about to risk all of it on a rescue mission that could destroy humanity's standing in the galactic community. But as reports filtered in from the Velis system, the urgency of their mission became increasingly clear. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures, consistent with bio-leech harvesting operations. Entire underwater cities that had housed millions of aqua were going dark. The few scattered transmissions that escaped the system painted a picture of systematic genocide. It was Dr. Miranda Hayes, the Earth Warden's chief science officer, who provided the breakthrough that would make their mission possible. Hayes had spent years studying alien biotechnology, with a particular focus on the kind of cyborganic systems that the Bio-Leech Collective had perfected. Her research had been largely theoretical until now. "Captain," she said, presenting her findings to Thorne in the ship's main conference room, "I believe I've found a weakness in Bio-Leech technology. Their cyborganic systems rely on neural networking protocols that allow individual units to share processing power and sensory data. It's what makes them so effective as a collective fighting force." Thorne studied the data Hayes had compiled, her enhanced eye processing, the complex biological and technological schematics at superhuman speed. And the weakness? Neural shock. If we can generate a focused neurological disruption field, we can temporarily sever the connections between individual bio-leech units and their collective consciousness. Without that shared processing power, they become significantly less effective. Chief Engineer Nyla Soto, who had been reviewing the technical specifications, looked up from her datapad. "What kind of power requirements are we talking about, Doctor? And what's the range?" Hayes manipulated the holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional model of the proposed neurological disruption device. "I can modify our communication arrays to generate the necessary frequency patterns. Range would be limited to about 50,000 kilometers, and we'd need to maintain the field for at least 10 minutes to ensure lasting effects. The power requirements. Well, we'd be drawing from the main reactor. We wouldn't be able to use primary weapons while the field is active. It was a risky proposition. The plan would require the Earthwarden to get dangerously close to the BioLeech fleet, while essentially defenseless. But it also offered the possibility of leveling the playing field against an enemy that typically operated with overwhelming numerical superiority. "How long do you need to implement the modifications?" Thorne asked. 6 hours, assuming we can fabricate the necessary components during FTL transit. Thorne nodded. "Do it, and Doctor, good work." As Hayes and Soto left to begin their modifications, Thorne found herself alone in the conference room with the weight of command settling on her shoulders. Through the viewport, she could see the twisted geometries of FTL space flowing past the ship reality itself, bent and distorted by humanity's conquest of interstellar distance. A soft chime announced an incoming communication, and Thorne was surprised to see the face of Vesper, Kale the diplomatic attaché, who had been assigned to the Earthwarden as part of humanity's efforts to improve relations with the Galactic Council. Kale was everything that Thorne was not. Politically savvy, academically accomplished, and utterly convinced that diplomacy could solve any problem given enough time and careful negotiation. "Captain," Kale said, his voice carrying the carefully modulated tones of professional diplomacy. "I need to speak with you about our current course of action. I've been monitoring communications with Earth Command, and I believe we're making a serious mistake." Thorne gestured for him to enter the conference room. Kale was a thin man in his mid-30s, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time in climate-controlled environments, rather than under alien suns. His formal attire, a diplomatic uniform that had never seen real combat, marked him as an outsider among the Earthwarden's battle-tested crew. "Speak your mind, Mr. Kale." "Captain, what we're proposing is a direct violation of the non-interference doctrine. If we attack BioLeech forces in Azath space without Council authorization, we'll be handing our enemies a propaganda victory that could set back human diplomatic progress by decades." Thorne turned to face the diplomat, her cybernetic eye automatically analyzing his stress patterns and vocal intonations. "And if we don't act, an entire species dies. How does that serve human diplomatic interests?" "The Galactic Council has procedures for handling these situations. Yes, they can be slow, but they exist for good reasons. If every species decided to bypass Council authority whenever they disagreed with official policy, the Council has already failed." Kale. Thorne's voice carried the hard edge that her crew had learned to recognize as a warning. They had months to respond to BioLeech expansion in this sector. They chose to do nothing, and now millions of Akwar are paying the price. Kale shifted uncomfortably clearly, unused to the direct confrontation that was normal among military personnel. "Captain, I understand your frustration, but we need to think about the broader implications. If we succeed in this mission, what happens next? Every species in the galaxy will expect humans to act as their personal military force whenever the Council fails to meet their expectations." It was a fair point, and Thorne knew it. The precedent they were setting could indeed have far-reaching consequences. But as she considered the alternatives, her decision remained unchanged. "Mr. Kale, I appreciate your concerns, but I'm not going to let an entire species die because of diplomatic protocol. If the Council wants to court-martial me afterward, that's their prerogative." The diplomatic attaché left the conference room, looking deeply troubled, and Thorne knew that her decision would be reported to his superiors. It was possible that Earth Command would order her to abort the mission, but the distances involved meant that any such order would take hours to reach them. By then, they would already be committed to battle. The final hours of their journey to the Velis system passed with tense efficiency. Dr. Hayes and Chief Engineer Soto worked around the clock to complete their modifications to the ship's communication arrays, converting sensitive scientific instruments into weapons of war. The other ships in the human fleet conducted their own preparations, checking weapon systems, reviewing tactical data, and preparing their crews for what would likely be the most dangerous engagement of their careers. When they finally dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Velis system, the sight that greeted them was worse than their most pessimistic projections. The bio-leech fleet was massive, nearly 40 vessels ranging from sleek interceptors to massive harvesting ships the size of small asteroids. The harvesting operations were already well underway, with massive tentacle-like appendages extending from the bio-leech ships into Velis's oceans, draining the underwater cities and processing their populations. Tactical analysis, Ms. Rodriguez. Thorne ordered as the Earthwarden's sensors swept the system. 37 bio-leech vessels confirmed, Captain. Configuration suggests this is a full harvesting operation. They're not just raiding, they're planning to strip the entire planet. Energy signatures indicate they've already processed approximately 40% of the Aquar population. The number hit Thorne like a physical blow. 40% of an entire species reduced to component materials for the bio-leech collective's continuing expansion. Millions of intelligent beings, each with their own hopes and dreams and families, turned into raw materials for an enemy that saw all life as nothing more than resources to be consumed. Fleet disposition, she asked, forcing herself to focus on the tactical situation. They're spread out across the planet's orbital zone to maximize harvesting efficiency. Most of their combat vessels are concentrated around the primary harvesting ships, but they have patrol squadrons covering the outer system approaches. Thorne studied the tactical display, her enhanced cognition processing dozens of variables simultaneously. The bio-leech fleet held overwhelming numerical superiority, but their formation was optimized for resource extraction rather than combat. If the human fleet could penetrate their outer defenses and get close enough to deploy Dr. Hayes' neural disruption field, they might be able to level the playing field. "All ships, this is Captain Thorne," she announced over the fleet communication channel. "We're going in fast and hard. Primary objective is to reach the main harvesting cluster and deploy the neural disruption field. Secondary objective is to evacuate as many Aquar survivors as possible. Tertiary objective is to destroy bio-leech harvesting capability in the system." The acknowledgements came back quickly, each captain confirming their understanding of the mission parameters. These were professional military officers, veterans of dozens of engagements against pirates and hostile alien forces. They understood the risks, but they also understood what was at stake. "Helm, take us in. Attack formation Delta 7. The human fleet accelerated toward the inner system, their approach vector calculated to minimize exposure to bio-leech sensor coverage, while maximizing their speed advantage. For the first several minutes, it seemed possible that they might reach their target undetected. Then the bio-leech patrol squadrons detected them, and space erupted into chaos. The first wave of attacks came from bio-leech interceptors, small, fast ships that looked more like metallic insects than traditional spacecraft. They moved with an eerie coordination that spoke to their collective consciousness, swarming toward the human fleet in patterns that would have been impossible for individual pilots to coordinate. But the human ships had advantages of their own. Their crews were enhanced for zero-gravity combat, their reflexes and reaction times pushed beyond normal biological limits by careful genetic modification and cybernetic augmentation. Their weapon systems incorporated lessons learned from decades of fighting in the hostile environment of deep space. The destroyer, relentless, opened fire, first its particle beam arrays, carving through the attacking interceptors with surgical precision. The heavy cruiser, adamant, followed with a salvo of guided missiles, each one independently programmed to track and destroy bio-leech vessels. Within minutes, the space around the human fleet was filled with debris and the expanding clouds of superheated plasma that marked the death of starships. But for every bio-leech interceptor they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy's numerical advantage was beginning to tell, and several human ships were already showing damage from the constant attacks. Captain Rodriguez reported from her tactical station, "We're taking heavy fire from the outer patrol squadrons. The Victorious has lost primary shields, and the Sovereign is reporting damage to her flight deck." Thorne watched the battle unfold on the main tactical display, her mind racing through possible alternatives. They needed to reach the inner system, where the main bio-leech harvesting operations were taking place, but the enemy's outer defenses were proving more formidable than anticipated. All ships prepare for emergency FTL jump. We're going to bypass their outer defenses entirely. It was a dangerous maneuver. Jumping to FTL while under fire risked catastrophic damage to both the ship's drive systems and their structural integrity. But it was their best chance of reaching their objective before the bio-leech fleet could reorganize their defenses. The Earthwarden's FTL drive engaged with a sound like reality, tearing apart, and for a moment that lasted an eternity, the ship existed in the twisted space between normal dimensions. When they emerged back into normal space, they were deep in the inner system, surrounded by the massive bio-leech harvesting vessels. The sight that greeted them was a nightmare made manifest. The bio-leech harvesting ships were unlike anything in human experience. Vast biomechanical constructs that seemed to be part starship, part living organism. Massive tentacles extended from their hulls into Velus's oceans, and through the transparent sections of these appendages, Thorne could see streams of organic matter being drawn up from the planet's surface. "Dr. Hayes," she called over the ship's communication system, "how long until the neural disruption field is ready?" 2 minutes, Captain. I need to complete the final calibrations." 2 minutes that might as well have been 2 hours. The bio-leech harvesting ships had detected their arrival and were already beginning to respond. Weapons batteries that had been concealed within their organic hulls were emerging like cancerous growths, targeting the human fleet with energy weapons that seemed to bend space itself. "Evasive maneuvers," Thorne ordered. "All ships protect the Earthwarden until we can deploy the disruption field." The next several minutes were the longest of Thorne's career. The human fleet fought with desperate efficiency, their ships weaving through a maze of enemy fire, while trying to buy time for Dr. Hayes to complete her work. The assault carrier, Sovereign, took a direct hit from a bio-leech heavy weapon, her hull breaching in 3 places and venting atmosphere and crew into the void. The destroyer, Victorious, lost her main engines and began drifting helplessly toward one of the massive harvesting ships. 1 minute, Captain." Hayes reported, her voice tight with concentration. The bio-leech ships were closing in now, their organic hulls shifting and adapting as they prepared for close-range combat. Through the main viewport, Thorne could see details that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Sections of the enemy ships that were clearly composed of biological tissue from dozens of different species, all fused together into a nightmarish amalgamation of flesh and metal. "Field ready, Captain." "Deploy it now." The Earthwarden's modified communication arrays activated, sending out a focused pulse of neurological disruption energy that washed over the bio-leech fleet like an invisible tsunami. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated movements of the enemy ships became erratic and confused as individual bio-leech units suddenly found themselves cut off from their collective consciousness. "All ships attack now," Thorne ordered. "Target the harvesting vessels." The human fleet struck with surgical precision, their weapons targeting the massive tentacles that connected the bio-leech ships to the planet below. Without their collective coordination, the enemy's defenses were suddenly vulnerable, and within minutes, 3 of the largest harvesting vessels were drifting powerless in space. But the neural disruption field was only temporary, and already the bio-leech ships were beginning to adapt. Their biological components were fighting against the imposed neural static, and Thorne could see signs that their coordination was starting to return. "Marines to the shuttles," she ordered. "We're going aboard the primary harvesting vessel. If we can plant a virus in their central processing core, we might be able to extend the disruption effect indefinitely." It was the kind of desperate gamble that characterized human military doctrine. A high-risk operation that relied on speed, audacity, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance at victory. As the Earthwarden's shuttle bay opened and the Marine assault teams prepared for launch, Thorne found herself remembering why other species called humans the most dangerous in the galaxy. The assault on the bio-leech harvesting ship was unlike anything in human military history. The enemy vessel's interior was a maze of organic corridors that pulsed with alien life, lit by bioluminescent growths that cast everything in an eerie blue-green glow. The Marines fought their way through swarms of bio-leech warrior forms, each one a unique fusion of biological and mechanical components. Major Sarah Kane led the assault team, her powered armor, allowing her to move through the ship's crushing internal atmosphere, while her enhanced reflexes let her react to threats that would overwhelm an unaugmented human. Behind her, 20 of humanity's finest special operations soldiers fought with the kind of controlled aggression that had earned their species its fearsome reputation. Movement ahead, Kane reported as her team advanced through a section that seemed to be composed entirely of neural tissue. Looks like we're approaching some kind of central processing area. The chamber they entered defied description. It was vast, easily the size of a city block, and filled with towering structures that seemed to be part computer, part brain, part something else entirely. Data flowed through the organic conduits in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the processing power of the bio-leech collective consciousness. There, Kane said, pointing to a central node that pulsed with particularly intense activity. That has to be the primary processing core. The virus that Dr. Hayes had prepared was contained in a specialized data storage device no larger than a human fist. But getting it to the central processing core would require the Marines to fight their way through the chamber's defenses. Autonomous weapon systems that emerged from the organic walls, like antibodies responding to an infection. The battle was brief, but intense. Kane's team moved with the precision of a surgical instrument, each soldier covering their teammates, while advancing toward their objective. When they finally reached the central processing core, Kane herself planted the virus device, watching as it interfaced with the alien technology and began spreading its disruptive code throughout the bio-leech collective consciousness. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the bio-leech fleet. As the virus spread through their neural networks, the coordination that made them so effective began to collapse entirely. Ships drifted out of formation, weapon systems went offline, and the massive harvesting operations ground to a halt. All ships, this is Captain Thorne. Primary objective achieved. Begin evacuation of Aquar survivors. The rescue operation that followed was a testament to human engineering and determination. The assault carrier, Sovereign, despite her damage, deployed every available shuttle and rescue pod to the planet's surface. The Aquar survivors they found were traumatized and confused, but alive. Entire underwater cities had been drained by the bio-leech harvesting operations, but pockets of survivors had managed to hide in deep ocean trenches and underground caverns. Elder Rylath, the Aquar leader, who had sent the original distress call, was among the survivors. When he was brought aboard the Earthwarden, his first words to Captain Thorne were a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "You came," he said, his voice carrying the harmonic tones of his species' underwater communication. "We had given up hope. The Council told us that intervention was impossible, that the risks were too great." Thorne looked at the alien leader, seeing in his large, expressive eyes the same mixture of relief and wonder that she had seen in human refugees countless times before. "We couldn't let your people die, Elder. Not when we had the power to help." Over the next several hours, as the human fleet worked to evacuate as many Aquar survivors as possible, reports began filtering in from across the Velis system. The bio-leech fleet was in complete disarray, their collective consciousness shattered by the viral infection. Some ships had gone completely offline, while others were fleeing the system in apparent panic. But even as they celebrated their tactical victory, Thorne knew that the real battle was just beginning. Word of their unauthorized intervention would spread quickly through the galactic community, and the political consequences would be severe. Those consequences arrived sooner than expected. As the Earthwarden prepared to depart the Velis system with the last load of Aquar refugees, A massive fleet emerged from FTL at the system's edge. The ships bore the insignia of the Galactic Council Enforcement Division, the military arm of the organization that governed interspecies relations. Captain Voss reported from the communication station, "We're receiving a transmission from the Council fleet. They're ordering us to stand down and prepare to be boarded." Thorne studied the tactical display, counting nearly 50 Council ships arranged in a perfect blockade formation. These weren't the bureaucrats and diplomats she was used to dealing with. This was a serious military force equipped and trained to enforce galactic law against any species that challenged Council authority. "Open a channel," she ordered. The face that appeared on the main screen belonged to Admiral Zethkar of Raxian, whose species had been among the founding members of the Galactic Council. His reptilian features showed no emotion, but his yellow eyes burned with an intensity that spoke to barely controlled anger. "Captain Thorne of the human vessel Earthwarden." He said his words, carrying the formal cadence of official proclamation. "You and your fleet are hereby charged with violation of the non-interference doctrine, unauthorized military action in protected space, and aggression against a recognized galactic civilization. You will surrender your vessels immediately and submit to Council authority." Thorne felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Her next words would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the galactic community. "Admiral Zethkar," she replied, her voice carrying the steady confidence that had served her through 2 decades of command. "I acknowledge your authority and the charges you've brought. But before we discuss surrender, I invite you to examine the evidence of what we found here." She gestured to Voss, who transmitted a comprehensive data package to the Council fleet. It contained everything they had recorded of the bio-leech harvesting operations, the systematic destruction of Aquar cities, the processing of millions of intelligent beings into raw materials, the complete failure of Council protection protocols. For several minutes, there was silence as Admiral Zethkar reviewed the data. When he spoke again, his tone had subtly changed. "The actions of the Bio-Leech Collective are disturbing," he admitted. "But this does not excuse your violation of galactic law. The Council has procedures for dealing with such situations." "Procedures that failed," Thorne replied. "Admiral, in the time it took your fleet to respond to our presence here, the Bio-Leech Collective processed 40% of the Aquar population. How many more would have died while the Council debated proper procedure? It was Elder Rylath who ultimately tipped the scales. The Aquar leader requested permission to address the Council fleet directly, and his testimony was devastating. Speaking in the formal language of galactic diplomacy, he detailed the months of unanswered distress, calls the Council's repeated assurances that help was coming, and the final desperate decision to call upon the most dangerous species when all other options had been exhausted. These humans, he concluded, risked everything to save people they had never met from a species they barely knew. They asked for nothing in return, except the chance to prevent genocide. If this is what the Council calls a violation of galactic law, then perhaps galactic law needs to be reconsidered. The political aftermath of the Velis incident, as it came to be known, reverberated through the galactic community for months. Captain Thorne and her fleet were ultimately cleared of all charges, but not before undergoing extensive hearings before the full Galactic Council. The proceedings were broadcast across dozens of worlds, and the testimony of the Aquar survivors created a groundswell of public opinion that the Council could not ignore. More importantly, the incident led to a fundamental reassessment of the Council's protection protocols. The non-interference doctrine remained in place, but new provisions were added that allowed for emergency intervention in cases of genocide or species extinction. The enforcement mechanism was strengthened, and response times were drastically reduced. For humanity, the Velis incident marked a turning point in their relationship with the galactic community. The reputation that had once marked them as dangerous outsiders began to evolve into something new, a species that could be counted on to act when others hesitated to risk everything for the sake of those who could not protect themselves. Captain Thorne returned to Earth a hero, But she found that the experience had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. The weight of command had always been heavy, but now it carried an additional burden: the knowledge that her decisions could affect not just her crew, but entire civilizations. 6 months after the battle, she returned to the Velis system on a very different kind of mission. The Aquar had rebuilt much of what they had lost, their underwater cities rising from the ocean floors, with a beauty that took Thorne's breath away. But the most remarkable sight was the monument they had constructed in orbit around their world. A massive sculpture that depicted two hands reaching toward each other, one clearly human, the other bearing the webbed fingers and scaled skin of an Aquar. Elder Rylath was there to greet her when she arrived, and his first words carried a weight of meaning that transcended simple gratitude. "Captain Thorne," he said, "we have a proposal for you. The Aquar worlds would like to formally request human protection under a new treaty framework, not as subjects or dependents, but as allies. We have something to offer in return. Our knowledge of underwater construction and aquaculture could be valuable to human colony efforts. More importantly, we can help humanity establish the kind of reputation in the galaxy that we believe you deserve." It was the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. A voluntary alliance between species based not on economic necessity or military advantage, but on shared values and mutual respect. Within a year, a dozen other species had requested similar arrangements, and the concept of the Protectorate Alliance was born. The alliance operated on principles that were revolutionary for the galactic community. Member species retained complete autonomy over their internal affairs, but agreed to mutual defense pacts and shared resource agreements. More importantly, they committed to the principle of intervention in cases of genocide or species extinction regardless of political considerations. Humanity found itself in the unexpected role of senior partner in this new alliance, not because of military superiority or economic dominance, but because of their willingness to act when action was needed. The reputation that had once made them feared began to make them respected and eventually beloved. Captain Thorne, now Admiral Thorne, commanded the Alliance's rapid response fleet from her flagship, the Earthwarden Reborn, a massive vessel constructed with technology contributed by all member species. It was faster than any human ship, had ever been more heavily armed than the old Council enforcement vessels, and crewed by volunteers from a dozen different worlds. But perhaps the most important change was philosophical. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most dangerous response to injustice was not action, but inaction. The non-interference doctrine remained an important principle, but it was no longer absolute. The protection of innocent life had become a higher priority than political convenience. Standing on the bridge of her new flagship, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so hostile, Admiral Thorne reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The distress call from the Aquar had seemed like a simple choice between following orders and saving lives. But it had become something much larger, a catalyst for fundamental change in how civilized species related to each other. The most dangerous species in the galaxy had become its protectors, and the galaxy was a safer place because of it. It was a transformation that had begun with a single decision to answer a call for help, and it proved that sometimes the most important battles were won, not with weapons, but with the simple willingness to do what was right. In the years that followed, the Protectorate Alliance would face many challenges. There would be political crises, military conflicts, and diplomatic disasters. But the principle established at Velis would endure, that the strong had a responsibility to protect the weak, and that true strength was measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the willingness to preserve. The humans had answered an alien SOS, and in doing so, they had discovered something about themselves that would define their place in the galaxy for generations to come. They were indeed the most dangerous species in known space, but dangerous to those who would prey upon the innocent, dangerous to those who would commit genocide in the name of efficiency, dangerous to those who would choose comfortable inaction over difficult justice. And perhaps that was exactly the kind of dangerous the galaxy needed.